On January 26, 1956, a boy was born who had been interested in physics from an early age. And when he was young, he built himself a bicycle that was powered by a jet engine. After graduating from college, he earned a degree in physics and electrical engineering and began working at Los Alamos National Labs in New Mexico, where he was inventing nuclear weapons. In 1982, he modified his car and put a jet engine on it, and Los Alamos put him in the newspaper, making him a household name in the area. Bob decided to find a new job. He sent out several applications, and when he got to the interview, it looked like a normal job in a remote location. But he soon realized it wasn't going to be normal. He was transported to his new job by plane and then by bus with darkened windows. He spent his first day at work just signing and reading a pile of papers, over 120 at all. At one point, they started mentioning some flying saucers, but Bob thought it was just some sort of memorization test or something like that. But he was very wrong. The next day when he arrived at his workplace, S4, which is something about 15 miles south of Area 51, he noticed that the whole building was covered in a pattern of sand. It didn't make sense to him, but then he figured it was so the lab wouldn't be picked up by satellites. Before he could enter or leave the building, he always had to put his hand on a scanner that measured the length of the bones in his hand, since each person has unique ones, and then let him in. Bob was assigned to a physicist named Barry, and he told him that they were working on one of the antimatter reactors that powered the flying saucer. Barry said, "Try to touch it," but he couldn't, as if there was some kind of barrier. It was because it generated reverse gravity that allowed the flying saucer to take off, but it needed element 115, which is called moscovium, to turn it on. And element 115 was officially proven to exist in 2013, about 20 years after Bob talked about it. Bob's job was to find out how it worked and if it could be used without element 115. And he found out from Barry that the generator they were working on had been on Earth for a long time, possibly thousands of years. And once he heard from the other staff that the physicists who had been in the position before him had died doing research, he was quite frightened. Whenever they found or discovered something new on the generator, they reported it to people in higher positions, and even their supervisors checked them regularly, asking how they had progressed since the last time. Bob was normally working just in his workplace, but one time there were open hangar doors, and he could see through. What he saw shocked him. He saw 9 flying saucers. The interesting thing was that each one was completely different in shape and age. Bob couldn't believe it, but was fascinated. He immediately realized that what he had read was true, and remembered that the documents said the flying saucers were from the Zeta Reticuli star system, which is 39 light years or 228 trillion miles away, which means it is 2.5 million times farther than the Sun is from the Earth. One day he was permitted by his supervisor to look into the flying saucer, but only under strict supervision, and for a short time. As he looked at it, he realized that it was made for people 2 times smaller than humans. There were small chairs that looked like they were for children. That's why these aliens were called children by the scientists at Area 51. When he was going back to his workstation, he walked down the hallway where there were a few doors with a small window. Bob was very curious, so he looked through the nearest door and saw 2 lab workers talking to something small. Bob didn't have much time to look properly, but he thinks it probably wasn't an alien. It could be just some replica, but he's not 100% sure. Some time passed, and one day when Bob was getting ready to go home, he suddenly saw something crazy. He saw a flying saucer outside the lab that was hovering in the air. He was shocked, and it didn't make sense to him. He immediately asked everyone around about it, and Bob found out that every Wednesday they tried to fly it. He told some of his friends about it, but they didn't believe him. So he took them to the hill next to Area 51 to watch the test flights a few times on Wednesdays, But when he was there with his friend the third time and they were looking at the flying saucer, they suddenly heard a sound as something had fallen. It was already nighttime, so they turned on the car lights, and what they saw surprised them a lot. There was a large group of soldiers with night vision, watching and listening to them the whole time. At that point, Bob knew the fun was over. The next day, they took Bob to the remote Indian Springs Air Force Base, where they blamed him for telling his friends, and even showed him the tapes of his calls. At that point, Bob knew he was in danger. He thought they couldn't just let him go now. To his surprise, they did nothing to him and let him go. But not for long. In 1989, Bob decided to tell the world what was going on. He thought people should know about it. So with the help of a journalist named George Knapp, who was interested in aliens, he went on TV under the changed name of Dennis, and without showing his face, he told the basic information about what he saw at Area 51. A few days after he was on TV, someone deleted all records of him getting a degree in physics and electronics, and also that he used to work at Los Alamos National Labs. Then George became even more intrigued by Bob's story and started looking for something to prove that Bob was telling the truth. Most of the evidence had been deleted, but George was able to find Bob Lazar's name in a phone book from 1982 in National Labs, and also found an article that mentioned Bob's creation of a jet engine car, which also said he worked for Los Alamos National Labs. George thought that if Bob agreed, he could take him on a lie detector, and Bob said that it was a great idea. They went on the lie detector a total number of 4 times, and each time, it turned out that Bob wasn't lying. Later, Bob made several more appearances on TV where he was seen and even introduced himself. After these interviews, his house was searched several times by the FBI looking for something. Later, he received death threats and a warning shot at his car. Some time has passed, and more evidence came to light. Jeremy Corbell, who was interested in aliens, got several photos of the hand scanners that Bob had previously described in detail. George Knapp also interviewed some people who worked at Los Alamos and confirmed that Bob worked there. So this was Bob Lazar's story. Let us know in the comments if you believed Bob's story. And if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel. If you want to know more, watch a documentary called Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers.